Dear friends, dear readers, dear YouTube followers, welcome in Aroca Press YouTube channel. My name is Gaetano Masciullo. I am a historian and philosopher, a freelance journalist, and in the coming months, I will guide you through the rich offerings of Aroca Press, exploring works by great authors in its catalog. Let's embark on this journey together. Aroca Press is a Catholic publisher committed to publishing both new and out-of-print gems to aid in reinvigorating the intellectual and devotional life of Catholics in every state of life. We will try to delve into the most pressing and thought-provoking issues of our time in our church and our society. And today we have the honor of speaking with Mr. Jules Samuels, the founder of the Savonarola Society, an organization dedicated to pursuing the canonization of Fra Girolamo Savonarola. Welcome, Jules. Thank you to be here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so Mr. Samuels is currently pursuing a master's degree in theology at St. Mary's University in Twickenham, London, and is a pre-seminarian for the personal ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham. I'd like to show you the cover of this book, Girolamo Savonarola, a sketch, written by James L. O'Neill, a Dominican friar, and edited by Jules Samuels, indeed. So the first question, tell us more about Savonarola project and what's the place of this last book inside it.
So the Savonarola project was something we launched in May of last year. We decided, my colleagues and I, that we wanted to embark on a rather ambitious project to increase the devotion to Savonarola by publishing all of his works in English for the first time. It's never been done before. It's fairly difficult to have access to his works in Italian, never mind in English. So we've decided that we want to publish collect, translate, publish in English for the first time. As part of that project as well, we realized that there are a lot of quality secondary sources, books, documents of various kinds that have never been translated from Latin or English or French, that we thought would be well worth having, especially as we move towards preparations for a canonical process. So we decided that we would publish this first book, as it's part of a series of two by the same author, the late Father James O'Neill, and it's meant to be an easy introduction, a dive into his life in English, very accessible, very easy to read, but also very thorough. It covers all the details very, very clearly, which is why we decided to start with this work.
Yeah. So how does the canonization process proceed? What has been also the historical path so far?
Well, the canonical process is a very long one, and we're still very much in the earliest stages. So according to canon law, according to the latest documents on canon law, we are still at the very first stage, which is the stage of promotion. So an individual, in this case Fra Girolamo, has certain promoters who want to promote devotion to him, and eventually, once those promoters build enough steam, they bring it to either the local diocese or the religious order to whom the particular individual belonged. We are not the first to have done it. The Dominican order herself has, at various points, begun the canonization process. It was decided in 1935 and again in 1996 that they would pursue the canonization of Fra Girolamo. I believe, from what I've been told so far, they got to historical and theological studies in 1997 before the Irish Jesuits caused a bit of a fuss. And so the process stalled, and the then postulator for the causes of saints, Fra Innocenzo Venchi, was removed from office in 2000, or replaced rather. And so the process has stalled, quite sadly, in my opinion, which is why we sort of stepped in to fill in that gap and keep promoting the cause and build, with all our publishing, that body of work which would be necessary to send off to the send off to the relevant authorities in the church to move to that first diocesan, that local stage, which would make him a servant of God.
May I ask you a very personal question, a curiosity of mine? What prompted you to be interested in the life of Savonarola?
Yeah, well, when I was an undergraduate, 5 years ago now, my parish, our university chaplain, was very dedicated to St. Philip Neri, and he gave me as a gift for Advent one year a copy of a biography of St. Philip Neri by a Dominican, or not a Dominican, an Oratorian, sorry, of the London Oratory, by the name of Father Paul Turks, I believe. And there was so much in there about St. Philip Neri's ardent devotion to Savonarola, and because of St. Philip Neri's love for him, I decided to investigate and find out more, and I began to fall in love with the person of the friar, who really is the first Counter-Reformation figure, even before the Counter-Reformation, who really influenced so much of Italy's saints: St. Philip Neri, St. Catherine de' Ricci, St. Alexander Soli, Blessed Sebastian Maggi, etc., etc. So he's a fascinating figure that, and thanks to St. Philip, I came to know the master from the student.
Okay, so why is his life relevant for Catholics today?
Well, I think his life is more relevant for Catholics today than really ever before. In 1956, Pius XII called him an apostle. I have the quote here. He called him an apostle who has a lively sense of things divine and eternal, who takes a stand against rampant paganism, who remains faithful to the evangelical and Pauline ideal of integral Christianity put into action in public life. And what that really means is that Savonarola was the first person coming from a Christian society to encounter this renewed paganism. Florence in the 15th century was quite renowned for its pagan morals, pagan living, pagan art, pagan everything. And of course,
even philosophy. Now let's think about
yes,
the
exactly.
Platonism, the Medici family, right?
And even certainly pagan morals. I mean, St. Francis, he wasn't the first Italian saint to be warning against the sin of sodomy, which of course Florence was famous for. And so we come to the 21st century, and we're presented with well, we've got a pagan culture right now. Everything around us is pagan morals, pagan art, pagan ideas, pagan philosophy. And so Savonarola is the first example in Christian history, and one of the greats in showing how we can take a society that's so thoroughly pagan and turn it back towards Christ. But I also think that in these times of crisis in the church, he does provide a very good example of what to do, one option of what to do when all the figures in the church are completely against you, because he was persecuted round and about. There were all sorts of figures in the court at Rome trying to sour the Holy Father on him. And to his great credit, he insisted on obedience right up until it became completely unconscionable. It was only really up until 1497, 96 that the issue of obedience became such a pressing issue. So I think for those reasons, he's not only critical for the church today, but a very good role model for individual Catholics, whether they're clerics or lay people.
Let's remember that Savonarola was a Dominican. So the question is, how is he viewed by Dominicans today?
Well, for a very long time, he's been venerated by the Dominican order. For a very long time, there was several offices composed for Savonarola for the breviary,
Okay.
including a copy with a little note by Pope Clement VIII on top, which said, "I desire to canonize Savonarola, and I permit him to be called the Blessed Doctor, Martyr, and Virgin." The Dominican order has always held him in love. Many Dominican saints, St. Catherine de' Ricci being one, have venerated him. He's always been defended by the order. Even this book was written by an American Dominican who also loved Savonarola. It seems to me, sadly, that love which the order kept from 1498 sort of slowed down in 1965 with the closing of Vatican II. And I think it's because to the liberals in the Dominican order, Sheila Becks and those types, he was everything they wanted to escape from, the ironclad inquisitor, the burning of the vanities, etc. And to the conservatives, the issue of obedience became all too important after the council. But certainly today, the love hasn't disappeared, and it's getting stronger. We personally interact with many Dominicans, Dominican priests, Dominican lay brothers, student brothers, third order members from all over the world who have a great love for Savonarola, whether they be from Italy, the United States. There's a very large community of South American third order members, particularly from Brazil, who follow us and support our work, and they have study groups, so I've been told, that they get together and they read bits of Savonarola during Lent or what have you. So he's very popular still within the order. Certainly our work has been received in some places with less joy than we'd hoped, but it's also been received with a great deal of encouragement. From Mancini, who is the current promulgator for the causes of saints for the Dominican order, knows of our work. He's encouraged us, albeit with a caveat that we better make sure to do it properly. But certainly, even famous Dominicans like Father Thomas Crean here in England have a dedication to Savonarola, which is well replicated right across the world, I think. The third order, I have to say, is especially devoted to him, which is good. I think he's an excellent patron for lay people, as well as clerics, religious. He was a very holy young man. Much of his spiritual writings were done before he entered the friary in Bologna. So I think it's very good that the devotion is spreading in the Dominican order and also beyond.
Yeah, of course. So one of the most interesting aspects concerns the relationship that Fra Girolamo had with the Pope. If I remind well, he was Alexander VI. This aspect is also addressed in the book. Could you tell us something about that?
Well, the relationship was, we can say, complicated. It fluctuated across the years. Beginning with the first interdiction, Savonarola wrote to Pope Alexander and told him the reasons why he couldn't come to Rome, and the Pope's interdiction was initially suspended. And then for the same reasons, it was restored and then taken back again. And it was a constant back and forth up until the final sort of sanctions, which came not for religious reasons, but for political reasons. It came in the light of the invasion of Charles VIII of France and the Italian wars, which resulted in a political league to try and expel the French invasion from Italy, the French invasion to claim the city of Naples. But the Florentine Republic, under the direction of Savonarola, refused to join the Italian Holy League to repulse the French. And so Savonarola got on the wrong side of Alexander. But the question of obedience is really immaterial, because it was political right the way down. And sadly, that political dispute was abused by certain enemies of the friar, by enemies in Rome, by Medici partisans, by Franciscans, not very Franciscans, very immodest, immoral people, but excuse me. But yes, I think the relationship with Alexander is somewhat, the fallout between him and Alexander is somewhat overblown, because whilst, yes, there was a bull of excommunication proposed, even Alexander seemed to have not really followed it. When Savonarola was going to his death, Pope Alexander himself gave him a plenary indulgence, the apostolic benediction. Pope Alexander gave him a special indulgence, unique to him, remitting him of all sin and the punishments from sin by his death. And much has been made, certainly amongst scholars, who would suggest that actually Alexander was sacrificing Savonarola to the ambitions of Cesare Borgia, his son. How true that is, I don't know. But really, I think, even putting all that aside, I think Savonarola's obedience doesn't necessarily impinge on his holiness, nor does it necessarily change the regard that we should hold him in. But there have been plenty of saints, of course, have been excommunicated before, and who have died excommunicated. Famously, St. Joan of Arc was one. And ultimately, the popes of the past have venerated Savonarola. Julius II, Clement VIII, Leo X, the Medici, came to San Marco and prayed in his cell. And so if previous popes, St. Pius X, Pius XII, if all these popes had no problem venerating him, I don't think we should have a problem venerating him either.
In the book, there is a very interesting chapter titled Savonarola and Luther. Indeed, Savonarola is often associated with the German heresiarch. In particular, Savonarola is said to have anticipated the revolutionary theologian on 2 points. First, the doctrine of justification by faith alone, and second, the denial of the Petrine primacy. Are these accusations true?
Oh, no. They're not true in any way. The funny thing is that this is actually a Protestant myth that the Protestants have now rejected. In the 19th century, you could find a great deal of Protestants, German and English-speaking Protestants, who viewed Savonarola as a predecessor.
Yeah.
But as we've mentioned, there's never been a complete translation of Savonarola's works into English, not ever. And the partial translations of bits and pieces here and there that were done in the 19th and early 20th centuries were often terrible. Certainly, these accusations come from a place of ignorance. Savonarola never questioned the church's teaching on the papacy or on justification. Even most Protestants today have moved on from believing this. You can go online and find plenty of Protestant sources that will say, well, Savonarola actually believed in everything the medieval church did, but there are possibly hints here and there of a closer approach to justification in some of his meditations, maybe. But I mean, that's not anything substantial. The truth is, if one reads the Triumph of the Cross, which was his very famous apologetic work, which he wrote just in, I believe, 1495. Yes, I think so. Which gives a full account of what he believes, but also an apologetic defense of the Catholic faith. He talks about the supreme primacy of the Holy See. He talks about the obedience which is due to, the Pope as chief shepherd. Even in some of his prophecies, he has a vision of the whole Christian world united under the See of Peter. So I don't think anybody could accuse him of denying papal primacy. And on the issue of justification, certainly there are some parts of his meditations, for example, where Protestants will say that he comes close, but the truth is that he's very much within the medieval Thomist tradition, which, of course, Luther, being an Augustinian monk, would have been familiar with, as much of it is drawn from St. Augustine. So I don't think it's very truthful at all to claim that Savonarola is some Protestant, is a prefigure of some Protestant theory of justification, but rather he's very much a devoted disciple of St. Thomas Aquinas on all these issues. And St. Thomas is within that medieval tradition, which is very Augustinian, which the Protestants would later on hijack and claim as their own, which is nothing new, of course. They've been doing it for centuries now. All manner of heretics do that. The Jansenists did it for Augustine. The Pelagians claimed many of the fathers for them. So heretics claiming other people who weren't heretics were heretics is nothing new.
Yeah. Tell us more about his prophecies. You mentioned them.
Well, they were collected in what's called the Compendium of Revelations, which we're working on. They're drawn from various places, from his sermons, from some of his apologetic works, and some of them we've lost because we've lost a great number of his sermons. But there are some key themes throughout what we do have. He preached a very famous one called the Renovation Sermon, in which he predicted that Florence, if it repented, would become the great city of Italy, that it would eclipse Rome, Rome would be punished, and Florence would be raised up by the hand of God. Sadly, Florence did not repent, and so the great things that were promised did not come about. But there's a great deal of prophecies in there, including prophecies about Luther. Savonarola prophesied that a great heretic would come out of the north, that he would set the world on fire with his heresies. He prophesied, as he announced in the pulpit, the invasion of Charles VIII. Excuse me. He prophesied actually the death of Lorenzo Medici, the Magnificent. It's a famous anecdote that when he was in the gardens one day, Lorenzo shouted out, the followers of Lorenzo shouted out, "Do you not know, Friar, that Lorenzo has the power to make you leave the city?" And Savonarola answered, "No, shortly Lorenzo will leave, but I will stay." So there are a great deal of prophecies, some of which came true, some of which, being conditional, did not. And, well, we only have ourselves to blame for that.
Yeah, yes, of course. Another curiosity of mine, what do you say to those who oppose the canonization of Savonarola, citing among the reasons that he created a society that in many ways anticipated Calvin's theocracy in Geneva? Savonarola indeed promoted religious and social reforms, often using coercive methods, such as the creation of a sort of moral police that controlled the behavior of citizens, or the institution of the bonfire of the vanities, where items considered morally corrupting were burned. Is this historical data true, first of all? And what do you answer to these objections?
Well, it is true that there was the bonfire of the vanities, and the citizens were encouraged to abandon certain ways of dress, certain ways of speaking, certain songs. But I don't think it's true to suggest that the Republic of Florence was some sort of totalitarian proto-Calvinist state. Savonarola did not abolish art. He didn't abolish culture. He encouraged the replacement of a pagan culture with a Christian one. Savonarola was a great patron of the arts. In fact, he was a poet himself. He wrote poetry. We have a number of his poems, actually, fittingly titled things like "On the Ruin of the World" and on contempt for the world and on the ruin of the church. Sorry. The truth is that these bonfires, these destructions of property, were not so much occasioned by a moral police, but by true and sincere conversion. Certainly, someone like Botticelli, who was a great disciple of Savonarola, Botticelli, the very famous artist Sandro Botticelli, was said to have, upon hearing one of Savonarola's sermons, rushed into his workshop and grabbed sketches to throw onto the pyre. And that should give you the impression that it wasn't so much a morality police knocking on doors and breaking heads. It was individuals so convicted by his preaching, by the realities, the spiritual realities involved, that they realized it was better to just burn these vanities than to keep them. And the majority of these vanities were not great works of art. They were not anything beyond trinkets, masks for balls, women's makeup, certain exaggerated styles of clothing, nude paintings, that sort of thing. So I don't think it's particularly fair to suggest that it was in any way barbarous or Philistine. But more than that, he wasn't any different, I don't think, from someone like St. Bernardine of Siena, who very famously had his preaching campaigns in which he encouraged people all up and down Italy to abandon vice, to get rid of things which led them into sin. Certainly, St. Bernardine of Siena's campaign against sodomy in Florence was of the same level, if not worse, than anything Savonarola did. So I don't think it's truthful, but more than that, I think it's a very modern standard which wants to encourage sin, wants to permit it where it flourishes, and say, well, we mustn't touch it. We must just let it be. And I think they're threatened by somebody who refuses to wallow in vice, frankly.
Do we know what Savonarola thought about the mercantile and banking life that was very successful in Florence at the time, also thanks to the Medici family?
Well, he himself was the son of a banker. His father had been a banker. His grandfather, however, was a physician and had been the physician for the Duke of Ferrara. But he was also a philosopher. But Savonarola was greatly influenced by St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching, of course, particularly on the issue of usury. So he was greatly opposed to usury in all its forms. That makes up a very key theme in much of his preaching, that usury is exploitation, that it encourages sin, it encourages violence, and that it's an act of injustice done amongst Christians. So he was very opposed in that sense to the forms of mercantile trading, which are so often based on usurious trading. But I don't think he was an enemy of the mercantile powers by any means. Simply calling them to that proper Christian understanding, which is non-exploitation, non-usuriousness. Greed is never a moral good.
Yeah. How should we view his excommunication?
With a great deal of doubt as to whether it was valid in the first place. It certainly seems that many popes since have regarded it as suspect. Pope Pius XI certainly viewed the excommunication as suspect. The reason for the excommunication, well, there are a number of reasons. There are generally standard clauses in these excommunications of the period, which are heresy, blasphemy, etc. But all of these have been dealt with. There have been several papal consistories, including one in which a miracle of St. Philip Neri occurred, where Savonarola's works have been found non-heretical, have been deemed non-heretical. So the only issue left after these charges of heresy is the question of disobedience. And the issue of disobedience should not be enough to merit a full excommunication. But secondly, the issues for which he was suspended initially on disobedience were initially accepted as reasons for not following through with the bull when it first came out. When Alexander first proposed a bull of suspension, Savonarola wrote to him and he gave him his reasons why he couldn't come to Rome, which had been one of the conditions for that he was ordered to come to Rome to discuss his prophecies with Pope Alexander. And he wrote back and answered that he couldn't because he was sick, and that he was in fear for his life if he left the city, which is, of course, still a reason in canon law to not comply with an order if you think you're going to be in danger for your life. That order was then remitted before being secretly republished and sent to not to the Dominicans, not to the bishop, but to the Franciscan friars, to their convent, who then brought it up in triumph to San Marco, and then remitted again before, for the exact same reasons, the final bull of excommunication is put forward in 1497. And I mean, not only is it a whole roundabout process, it's very suspect in canon law, even the canon law of the time, let alone the canon law of today. And so the second work that we're working on actually in this series was Savonarola excommunicated? And it goes in to all these issues in very great detail in canon law. And the answer is, we shouldn't think so. There was no grounding for it, no real legal grounding, other than Alexander wanted rid of him, which isn't a valid reason now, and it wasn't a valid reason then. Certainly, he was morally blameless on these issues. Blessed Sebastian Maggi, who had been appointed by Alexander to oversee Savonarola's convents in San Marco and the congregation in Lombardy, personally stated, having been his confessor during that time, that he'd never committed a mortal sin. Which should go to show you that whatever was going on here, I don't think it was the case of a person sinning through an act of complete disobedience. But ultimately, even if it were the case that he had some problems with his obedience, it shouldn't necessarily be discrediting to him. But I think we have very good reasons for suggesting that the excommunication was very suspect in the first place.
Yeah. What other works are coming out as part of the Savonarola project?
Well, as I've mentioned, we're looking to do all of his works in English. So there'll be about, I believe, 35 volumes by the time we're done, which includes the collections of his sermons, his tracts, his poems, his letters, various other writings. He was very prolific, mostly as a preacher, but also in his writings. But as well, following on from this work, we're working now on the sequel to this, as it were. Was Savonarola excommunicated, as I previously mentioned. I'm currently working on a translation for the third work in these secondary sources of Fra Bayonne, who is a French Dominican priest's biography of Savonarola, which is fascinating. I've learned so much just from the short amount that I've translated so far. But we're also looking at many of the other Italian sources, such as Guasti, such as Pico's biography, as well as various other Latin sources, Zovio's Historia Ecclesiastica. So there's a lot in this project. It's all still to come, really. We're only at the very earliest stages, which is very exciting.
Thank you, Mr. Samuels, for sharing your profound insights with us. It has been an honor to explore such very interesting topics about Fra Girolamo Savonarola alongside you. I am Italian, so I have been particularly interested in this figure, in this topic. And to our readers, I encourage you to delve into Jerome Savonarola's sketch and the other treasures of Arroca Press. Until next time, may we all continue seeking truth with courage and faith. Thank you, Jules.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.